Hi, welcome to Tinfoil Handkerchief Alignment. Today I'm going to talk about balancing chakras and what that even means. Chakra alignment isn't something that's typically suggested as a spiritual remedy for Christians. My personal perspective on this is that it's because I think the love language of, say, Catholicism is usually acts of service for others. I've found that over the years, that's become things like bake for the sale, bring a casserole to your neighbor, donate to the church, sing in the choir, become a member of the clergy. While all of those things are great, it's important that the intentions of the acts of service come from a place of genuine love and care instead of just not wanting to look bad or because it just looks good. I don't like sharing my energy with things that don't feel authentic. So if it's not an authentic connection, don't pretend it is. Maintaining your values is generally not the most appealing. With that said, it depends on what would define rewarding to you. For me personally, truthfulness and healing my personal internal struggles are more important to me than the perception of others. And so far, no one's been able to tell me how or why God would disagree with that. I look at it from the perspective that acts of self-love service my spiritual health, which, in my personal experience, has led to an overall improvement in my mental and physical health. Because I do tend to hold a lot of stress in my body. It's just usually it's been the more stressed out I am, the worse I feel internally. What acts of self-love looked like for me was making time for self-reflection, meditation, and doing my shadow work. I'll expand more on what shadow work is in a different episode, but it's essentially working through your trauma. I went through a dark night of the soul. I'll explain a bit more about that as well another time, but it's basically an ego death. You versus your ego, which for me came when I felt like my world was falling apart. The first time. I took it all as an opportunity to look at myself honestly, and I became so dedicated to my healing that for at least a year I was doing 2 to 4 hours of shadow work every day. I'd do at least an hour after work, maybe 2 if I felt like I was making real progress. You don't actually have to spend that much time on it, and it doesn't have to be as intense as it sounds. I did it that way because that's how I wanted to, and I had the time to do it because I was so tired of feeling spiritually broken. And again, none of this is me saying that there aren't things within myself that I still need to heal. My personal wounds didn't hurt so much, and I could process them like an adult and not just a kid holding on to 40 years of hurt. But by working as hard as I have on my shadow work and doing maintenance on balancing my energy, I feel much more internally calm than I had at any time in my life previously. Chakras are energy centers within the body. There are 7 main ones that each have a different role within our own biological ecosystem. The more imbalanced or blocked those energy centers get, the more internal conflicts we feel. Career, matters of money, and home life are associated with the root chakra, which is at the base of the spine. Home life is kind of a general term, but my personal interpretation of it is it's more about relationships to ourselves and others. Starting to recalibrate your chakras should start in the root chakra, as it brings better balance and helps ground your energy because it is the chakra associated with earth. Water is associated with the sacral chakra, which helps balance the flow of sexual or intimate energy and expression, creativity, and helps with determining things like whether or not self-image impacts our relationship to food. This chakra is located just below the belly button. The solar plexus, it's more about authenticity and perspective of self, our accomplishments. This chakra is associated with the element of fire, which also represents personal passions. The heart chakra is at the center of the body and is the most self-explanatory. How we perceive or connect to concepts like love, compassion, and empathy, and air and how we express or communicate those feelings to others. Ether, associated with the throat chakra. The throat chakra is located exactly where you'd expect it to be. Between the eyebrows is the third eye chakra. Restoring a healthy energetic flow to the third eye helps improve discernment with intuition, dreams, or spiritual encounters, including detecting incoming spiritual attacks. At the top of the head is the crown chakra, representing our connection to consciousness and the world around us. Working to balance will also help prevent and protect against spiritual attacks, because I've found that recalibrating my spirit helped improve my overall self perception and how I deal with situations as they arise. Energetic attachments can also be a real thing, and I find that the best way to prevent them is chakra alignment. It also strengthens your personal auric field. Spiritual attacks attach to holes within our energy. The holes are generally caused by various traumas or moments of hardship and grief that we've experienced over the years. Much of it is unresolved childhood wounds that appear in different ways in our adulthood. By repairing your personal energetic field, it allows for the wounds to heal and prevents other attachments of a lower frequency from being able to connect to your energy. Dark attachments feed on negative emotions, but attuning to the light brings in more positive emotions. I should be clear that to recalibrate your energy, it's very focused on self. Not in a selfish way, but more in a way where you know the work begins within. Improving self improves the energy external to you. There is some overlap between chakras and bodily functions, which is why it's important to work towards balancing the whole body. Though some chakras may require more recalibration than others, I've found it's better to work in layers. The reason being, the more healed parts will help heal some of the parts that are less so to start. But it's great for personal internal reflection as those feelings arise and the energy center of whichever chakra you're working on starts functioning properly again. How chakra imbalances can impact you will also depend on your personal life experience and the kinds of traumas that could cause the blockages. For example, many of the physical pains that can manifest in the lower legs, such as knees, calves, ankles, heels, feet, toes, may be impacted by negative feelings that are ultimately based in low self-worth, fear, or anticipation. These can be good indicators of root chakra imbalances. Compounding traumas without processing the feelings that arise as they happen are how people tend to get pulled in a downward trajectory when it comes to healing. Working through the layers in a healthy, positive way brings the flow of internal energy back to being less chaotic. Even if you don't fully feel healed, it's usually an improvement from where you were starting at. Rebalancing energy within your physical body also requires a level of honest self-reflection, but it also feels like alleviating some weight of emotional baggage. The chakras are associated with different elements, which also corresponds to different astrological signs, planets, colors, and senses. Now that might be where it starts sounding a little woo-woo. However, all of those things work with universal vibrations which interact differently with others around it. Although belief in planetary influence on individuals is usually seen as something for recluses and cat ladies, if you look at it as we all have vibrating molecules on the inside, and the planets have vibrations on the outside, it makes sense that there is some level of reaction in how those things interact together. Further to that, the different planets and zodiac signs all represent different traits. The signs also represent different elements, and each one represents its own astrological house, where it's the most vibrationally stable. The astrological placements in your chart can help navigate your relationships or correlations with the different aspects of what each astrological house represents. Planets and constellations have their own magnetic fields. Our personal energy fields can be impacted by planetary shifts depending on how the corresponding energy within our bodies is functioning at the time. So when you think of it like that, it sounds a little bit less woo-woo. Where I personally think a lot of people get the wrong impression about a lot of this stuff is focusing more on the future vibrational interactions. By working to repair the holes in our personal energetic fields, so to speak, our personal vibrations are less impacted by planetary and astrological alignments that would normally be more vibrationally intense. You hear the jokes about things like Mercury retrogrades, but if you get super stumbly with your words or stuck in your emotions, it's probably during that time. A good time to rebalance your upper chakras. Also an important time to reflect before reacting, because there's more of a likelihood of miscommunication in interpersonal relationships. especially for water signs like Pisces, Cancer, and Scorpio, or a sign with more reactive traits to begin with, like Aries or, again, Scorpio. Side note on astrology, I think a lot of people look at it from the wrong perspective. Think of it less like trying to predict the future based on the type of things that can occur during certain planetary alignments, because that seems to be where traditional Christians get a little weird about it. I like to think of things like astrology or tarot as hypotheticals. If a certain situation were to come up, what would you do? Which of my own traits should I be mindful to manage during times where I need to be more vibrationally inclined to do so? It doesn't mean I have to act on anything. It just means that I can be more balanced and have more clarity in the moment if it does happen. My personal experience is that focusing on balancing my chakras helped me get to a more mentally stable and less reactive or hurt space. By feeling more connected to myself and the universe around me, I felt more spiritually whole, like the type of person God would welcome back to the congregation. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying God doesn't accept those who don't work on energetic alignment. It was my personal feelings of not feeling good enough to rejoin Christianity after I'd been mad at God for so long. But as I worked through balancing my energy and repairing my internal spiritual wounds, I felt more confident in my approach back to faith because I felt more spiritually aligned with the principles of faith that I walked away from than I did at the time I walked away from them, where I feel proud to say I'm Christian again and not shrug and say I'm spiritual non-religious. So this was just kind of an overview on what indicators of chakra imbalance could look like. And I'm hoping some curious Christians are interested enough to think of things like energy balancing as something helpful rather than something occult, because I personally feel it's something that can help a lot of people regardless of religion. So I hope you come along for the ride, and until next time, keep the peace.